Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 158 on the East Coast and 1058 on the West Coast. My name is Josh Breslow, and I'm here for the next couple hours to bring you all of your top stories, live events, and breaking news. Do want to take a live look over the White House in D.C. at this hour as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy will head to Washington Monday to meet with President Trump. Now, that visit comes on the heels of Friday's high-stakes face-to-face chat between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin over in Anchorage, Alaska. A lot to discuss about what happened and what to expect. So let's bring in Lucas Tomlinson with Fox News joining us now. Lucas, thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon, Josh. Great to be here.
All right, so first off, I do have to ask you, because we're learning from President Trump about this meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy there at the White House. What do we expect to happen from that meeting, especially after what happened during their last public meeting in the Oval Office?
That's right. Well, President Trump sat down with our colleague Sean Hannity after the summit in Alaska, and it was very revealing when Sean asked President Trump, what would your advice be to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy? And President Trump said, make a deal. And now this morning we learned, thanks to the president's post on Truth Social, that the Ukrainian president is coming here to the White House Monday. So it's very likely that President Trump's going to put pressure on Zelenskyy to make a deal. Now, what does that look like? That's where things get pretty contentious on both sides. Ukraine and Russia feel far apart. President Putin has reportedly asked for all the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine. And the Ukrainians do not want to cede that much territory. And we're not just talking about minerals and farmland, Josh. The cities of Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, these are major cities, at least before the war. Kramatorsk is where the Ukrainian military bases their eastern operations. There are still trains that run from Kyiv to Kramatorsk. There are fortified positions there. And the concern is that if Ukraine were to give up this area without a fight, that the Russians could take over, and that sets the stage for a future offensive, perhaps after a ceasefire takes place over a few years and Russia rearms. Now, the thinking there is, perhaps from the White House perspective, is get to a ceasefire, end the war, give Ukraine time to rearm, certainly give the Europeans time to buy Western weapons, although it's notable the U.S. military is in a shortfall, at least the defense industrial base, about 7 years in the hole from all the weapons that have been handed over to Ukraine. In fact, the Polish military is still waiting for the tanks from Ohio, but I digress. But there's a big backlog of weapons to produce. But back to the deal or potential deal on Monday, the president announcing that Ukraine's president is coming here to the White House Monday, and perhaps with some other European leaders as well. We heard a very united European component. You know, before President Trump went to Alaska, he was on the phone with European leaders. Remember, Zelenskyy went to Berlin. He met with the German chancellor, and they were on a call with other European leaders. They called President Trump. So it's trying to be this united Western front, but ultimately it does feel like President Trump is the one who's going to have to broker this deal. The big question, of course, will Zelenskyy accept it? And there's been some Gallup polling in Ukraine that many Ukrainians are fed up with the war. They just want this war to end and would be happy to, maybe not happy, they would be willing to cede some land to Russia in exchange for peace, because many people, especially in Ukraine's capital, who are every night going to the subway, going to those bomb shelters as these drones that Russia has been firing on Ukraine continue to rain down hundreds at a time each night. And of course, the Chinese and Iranians are helping Russia with that.
Have we heard a lot from President Trump today? He's back at the White House, or did return overnight. I know he made some calls speaking with Zelenskyy, possibly NATO leaders as well. What have we heard from him today, if anything, other than the fact that Zelenskyy will be there Monday?
Well, Zelenskyy has firmly rejected this idea of ceding any territory in the Donbass. I think there could be perhaps some other land agreements, the Zaporizhia region, the Kherson region in southern Ukraine. You know, that's also a divided area. Remember, President Putin in September of 2022, months after the full-scale invasion, he annexed these regions, these four regions, Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Of course, he already had Crimea, and he annexed this territory, said this is now Russian property. That's been really at the heart of this war ever since. There's been some fighting to the northeast in the Kharkiv region, Sumy, what have you. And of course, the Ukrainians launched that offensive into Russia. They still contain about 30 square miles in Russian territory. That could possibly be part of a deal. But that's really the sticking point. I know I'm throwing out all these fairly obscure regions for some of our viewers, but if the front lines were to freeze where they are, perhaps that's something that the Ukrainians could accept, Josh. This is the sticking point, is Putin wants more than that. He wants the entire Donetsk region. Russian forces already control all of the Luhansk region, so he wants the whole of Donbass. That's those two regions together. The Donbass region of eastern Ukraine, it's very mineral rich. It's the Rust Belt of Ukraine, if you will. And this is an area where Russian forces have taken a hold, and Ukraine has shown no signs over these past 3.5 years of the full-scale invasion that they can retake this land. So that's part of really the brass tacks, the real politic of the situation with the negotiations right now, is Ukraine has not shown the ability to retake this land. They're holding on to about 80% of the country right now. Russian forces have about 20% of Ukraine. But right now, what Zelenskyy is saying is he's rejecting this idea of giving the Donbass, all of it, to the Russian forces. But there's no question, there's probably going to be some pressure here at the White House Monday, is to make this agreement and then get a ceasefire. That was part of the sticking point. When President Trump was flying to Alaska aboard Air Force One, he sat down with our own Brett Baer, who the president said pretty candidly he wouldn't be happy if a ceasefire didn't take place. Well, that was one of the key aspects of this summit. There was no ceasefire agreement. The Russians seemed to be pretty happy with that. They said they could continue on with their war in Ukraine. But that's one of the reasons Zelenskyy is coming here to the White House Monday, is try to hash this out. Now, is there something to salvage? Of course, we'll have to find out Monday. But for the time being, Zelenskyy is being very public with the fact that he does not want to see the entire Donbass region.
And Lucas, before I let you go, I did want to ask you about a comment that was made just yesterday during that news conference between Trump and Putin, where we actually heard Putin say the next meeting could be held in Russia. Do you believe that's a real possibility based on what we've seen so far?
With President Trump, anything's possible, right? I mean, he's gone to Singapore to meet Kim Jong-un. He's gone to Vietnam to meet the North Korean leader there as well. Of course, he's met with President Putin before in his first term in Helsinki. There's no question the president is putting a lot of political capital on the line, really staking a big part of his presidency on ending the war in Ukraine. Again, it would just have to be, would this be the final step in Ukraine? If he were to go to Russia, go to Moscow? There's a lot of critics who said by hosting President Putin in Alaska, that was giving Putin and the Russians a diplomatic victory, normalizing relations. You saw the friendly handshakes. The question would be, if Trump were to go to Moscow, what would those optics look like, Josh? I think that's one of the big issues there.
All right, Lucas Tomlinson there at Fox News. Great discussion as always. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
Josh, anytime.